Well, good morning. Thank you for the kind introduction, perhaps not very well deserved. He's just too nice of a guy. I do live in Los Angeles. My company, Green Wings Biomedical, is in the business of transforming intellectual property, inventions, patents that come out of universities in the United States or global, although we haven't started any projects with a global with a company, with a technology outside of the United States, and we convert these technologies, these patents into viable, commercial-grade biomedical devices that we either sell as an early exit transaction to a larger company, or we find the right team to operate that commercially. So that's what we do. So we come across a lot of technologies, a lot of innovation, some very interesting, some not so much, but that's okay. You have, as they say in the United States, from the story, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince, and that's what we do, and we eventually find princes. So as it relates to crowdsourcing in healthcare, really the biggest picture in healthcare globally is that just as there are many cultures and there's many people with different backgrounds at all levels, cultural, socioeconomic, educational, et cetera, there are as many models by which people consume healthcare. And this is probably most evident in Singapore than many other parts in the world. I spent here 2 days, and the diversity of people and culture is enormous. And I'm pretty comfortable to say that if you get into the MRT and you have 10 people around you, their way they consume healthcare and what they expect is different, regardless of the fact that they all live inside of the same healthcare system. So in the context of that, there's one thing that is common, however, no matter what culture and how you consume healthcare, it is that when it's all said and done, we want what's best for us health-wise, for us and for our families. That doesn't change. So what does it mean to have good healthcare? Well, there are three factors that you must remember in healthcare, because everyone has to work within. The first one is improved outcomes. Outcomes is the jargon for results. You want to have good diagnoses of what may be affecting you and good treatments that will cure the problem that was just diagnosed. So good outcome. It's not easy. You want to reduce costs everywhere, here, everywhere else. You may not be paying out of your pocket. The government of Singapore may be paying it, but someone's paying for it. And its payments are going up. And the third part of it is access, like this village in the backwoods of Colombia in South America. The government, the people there, everyone wants to make sure that those folks, no matter how remotely they are in the Amazonian basin of Colombia, as an example, have access to healthcare. So you're talking outcomes, cost, and access. Those are the three key drivers of everything we want to do in healthcare and the industries that supply healthcare, like in my case, biomedical devices. But this is easier said than done. It's a very complicated industry. In fact, it is by far the most complicated industry because there are so many different variables. The issue about healthcare is so personal, it can affect us at the least expected moment. And again, there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of variables, of which probably the most important one is the big one in the middle, which is behavior. Easily 50% of the problems that you're going to have in healthcare because of your lifestyle. And that's not an accusation because I'm in the same boat, right? I eat too much and we all do things that we shouldn't and don't do enough of what we should. So in the middle of all this, that is a complicated issue, you have some key players that, as the bottom right picture shows, you are working against each other more times than they should. You have doctors and patients. You have the pharmaceutical industry, biotech producing pharma medications. You have the device companies, and that's my sector, is the devices. You have politicians who swear they have the best interest in mind for you, which of course sometimes it's true and sometimes not so much. You have the insurance company that everyone expects them to pay everything and not collect any money because somehow they are supposed to pay for this out of someone's kindness of the heart. And all this is complicating the whole big picture. Meanwhile, costs continue to go up. Again, you might not be paying it in certain health systems, but someone's paying for it, and it is going up everywhere in the world, no matter how you look at it. It's getting more complicated now. As was mentioned earlier, you can attach a few sensors to your body, and you're producing terabytes of information per minute. And that's coming into the system, and something has to make sense out of it. The amount of research is going up. In research in life sciences and healthcare is going up dramatically. And the paradox is that despite all this, we're actually, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, we are in many cases hitting the point of diminishing returns. It's gone so complex that we actually are getting worse care because of the complexity. And in my opinion, the best example of this is Obamacare, which is this invention of the United States government that's supposed to re-engineer this 1/6 of the U.S. economy with a 2,000-page law, and it is so complicated. It is so complicated that no one can understand, that no one wants to do about it. It has become so complex that the outcomes are going to be worse. It's going to produce worse outcomes in healthcare. It's going to cost more, and in many cases, it's not going to improve access. In fact, it's already decreasing access because of the way that the insurance companies and the providers are responding to all this complication in the law. The outcome and the consequence of this is that what do you do? We don't know what works. We don't know what doesn't work in many cases. We think it do. We try it out. And again, it's so complex. We have this paradox that we know so much that we actually know less than we thought, which is one key piece of condition. It's one key condition that opens the door to the wisdom of the crowds. A survey published just a few days ago, a couple weeks ago in the United States, showed the numbers that show below the Google logo that 86% already search Google or a social media network before scheduling a doctor's appointment. 90% of the people surveyed trust information shared in social networks, which in my opinion is completely insane, because anything can publish any nonsense on a social network. But that said, it's convenient, people are consuming that. And then 41%, which is an amazing number. No provider would ever think that the case that almost half the people are actually choosing their healthcare provider by actually going online and getting information from strangers in the way either of search engines like Google or some of the social networks that are the generic social networks, Google+, Facebook, etc. And I put Discuss, which is this, Discuss rather, that's how they pronounce it. It's a placeholder for the comments that go into every article. I suspect many of you spend more time reading the comments in an article than reading the article itself. You read the article, say, I don't believe, I don't understand it, but let me see what the crowd is telling me below, and you start learning. Anyone don't experience this? And if you say, no, I don't believe you, because we all do that, and it's actually good. So no, you don't do that, but I don't believe her because she does. Everyone looks at the comments, that's good. I'm not saying that's bad, it's actually very good. This is part of the crowdsourcing. But this is not limited to, the healthcare crowdsourcing is not limited to these examples. We do have more specialized environments. One of them is patient innovation, which is the speaker following me. I don't know if he's here in the crowd already. Some gentleman, where are you? That would be him. So by kindness, I put him up there. I don't know what they do exactly. I'm going to find out with you, but I suspect it's very similar to patients like me. In that world, in that quadrant, where patients consume information from other patients or consumers, consumer to consumer. And we have those. CrowdMed is a company that is making a lot of noise. They have a very good public relations machine in the United States, and they've invented this idea, this concept called the medical detective. They run contests, and so if you have a condition that you either don't know what it is or you don't trust what your doctor tells you it is, you can create a contest, put a few dollars on the table, and the money goes to those who come up with the best solution to your problem. And the people who are detectives, in fact, are expected to be not medical trained personnel, but actually people who understand about this, even though they're not physicians or nurses. So those are examples of consumers working with other consumers, either through platforms like crowdsourcing platforms or contests, which is a form of crowdsourcing. But it's not limited to consumers. There are some, and they're listed at the top there, social networks that are for physicians. By the way, you can have the presentation. There's nothing proprietary here, so you're welcome to have it. Take pictures if you want, but you know, the conference, I'll be happy to have the conference distribute this to you guys. And then you have the social networks for physicians. There's 3 at the top there, and where doctors go to talk to other doctors for the purpose of understanding what is wrong with the patient, finding providers that they can work with in the certain conditions, specialists, and so forth. United States, as you know, is a very large country, and the specialist, the closest specialist for some asthma condition for a patient in Iowa might be Texas, and that is actually as far as it is from here to China, or probably further away or sort. So this becomes a platform for that. And there's even an interesting example. I found this by doing research for the conference like Epi found these guys. Modernizing Medicine is a company in Florida that produces an electronic medical record system where they have embedded all this crowdsourced knowledge into the electronic medical record system so that when the physician is actually using it for the purpose of documenting the interaction with their patients, they can actually use it right there inside of their workflow, get access to the social media and other crowdsourced information. It makes it very practical, and I believe they're being very successful for the very reason. Beyond physicians, clinical trials, which is where many drugs go to die because they don't get past the clinical trial. Historically, it's been going down a protocol. A bunch of scientists, probably fewer than in this room, will get together and come up with a clinical trial protocol and then spend billions of dollars executing against that. And sometimes they go, oops, didn't work, and the billions of dollars are gone. Using crowdsourced concept, these companies are helping pre, during, and post-clinical trial use the crowd to generate a more effective more effective clinical trial. And the bottom one, transparency, life science is going beyond that of just producing protocols for clinical trials, but they're actually inventing drugs on the basis of what the crowd is telling them. Very interesting. They already had the first drug that has gone through that has started to go through the Food and Drug Administration that was born out of a crowdsourced activity that they implemented. Genomics, we all carry chromosomes. You probably know that already. You probably heard of the company 23andMe that got into a little trouble with the Food and Drug Administration, but that's temporary because eventually, in fact, it's going to make them a better company, in my opinion, and they're already starting to notice this, that by having to withdraw their product from the market because of some claims or some people using the information for things that the FDA thinks are dangerous, they're going to use it more to crowdsource the understanding of what the genome means. I mean, we think that we know about genomics. I can tell you we know nothing about it. I mean, they say, oh, we found the gene for this. Not true. Maybe once in a while the easy things are being picked. It's extremely phenomenal. But things interact with each other, plus they interact with the phenotype, meaning your symptoms, your age, your weight, your environment, and so forth. And they all work against each other. And that's what crowdsourcing is going to help, is put the genotype inside of the phenotype and inside of the other variables that affect individuals' health. And companies like 23andMe are perfectly suited to being part of that world. There's also innovation platforms that are crowdsourced. Innocentive, company based both in the US and the UK. They use a contest crowdsource where primarily large companies, many of them drug manufacturers, ask the crowd for solutions to certain problems. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but they say, can you guys out there find me a way to solve this problem? And that's posted in Innocentive, and people go in there, find the problem, and they propose solutions to the problem, and the winner gets the money. Marbler is the other way around. There's an invention, say from NASA. They have a portfolio of inventions that runs into the literally millions of patents. What do we do with this stuff? Well, if you give it to people, 10 people in a room, no one will come up with new ideas. But give this to the world will come up with some very interesting uses for these patents, and that's what Marbler does. And Patexia, which is also in the patent world, they produce a contest, they implement contests for the purpose of you finding guidance on how to execute the prosecution of your patent, which is extremely expensive. You can spend years and years going through the process only to find out 5 years later that someone over there in, I don't know, Northeast New York State had filed a patent that was not even related to your field, but which conflicted with you and killed your entire intellectual property strategy. In fact, Patexia was going to be here today, but today, meaning tomorrow in the United States, they're having a meeting with the U.S. Patent Office, which has become alert that this might be a solution to the enormous bottleneck inside of the Patent Office in the United States. It's a crowdsourced approach, and Patexia is the only company doing it. Well, there's two, but they're doing it better than the other ones. So they're invited to speak with them, and disrespected this conference by choosing to do that than this, but I think we can understand that. In the wellness and fitness area, there are a billion, zillion, trillion applications for Android and iPhone, and suspect some of you are carrying these bands and things and bracelets and software. Much of that is complete garbage, is useless. Some people use it for 2 weeks, throw it away. It's uninteresting. But it's an interesting place to begin. It's certainly not the end solution, and that's what's interesting to me, but it's the beginning of demonstrating that some of these wearable computing connection with smartphones are producing some pretty interesting ways of tracking people and giving feedback to people so they can be engaged with the fitness. Remember, again, 50% of the problems that are going to affect you in your life are directly related to your lifestyle, which are primarily related to what you eat and how much exercise you get or don't. So anyway, so that is how this relates. I repeat, most of the stuff that you will find is useless, garbage, is terrible, but as many things happen in technology, it's a beginning place, and it's only going to get better, which is good. But all this is producing enormous amounts of data called big data. I don't know that this very imaginative name, you probably heard it. Well, you heard it earlier when the gentleman from StarHub was talking about it, and this is never ending. And those companies across the top there are some examples of companies developing platforms to analyze big data. But in my opinion, the big part of big data is going to be when the databases get open to the public and they start figuring this out. This already started happening with the census data in the United States. Some years ago, the census, which produces billions and billions and billions of data points per minute almost, got open to the public, and they started to find all sorts of interesting things. Our current president says one thing and does another, but along the way, he did a little bit one thing, that he opened a lot of the government databases to the public for the purpose of the public being able to find in there the big data trends that are happening. And some of the companies up there are companies that have the engines to analyze the data, because you certainly can't do it with pencil and paper, and Excel falls apart very quickly, but nonetheless, that's all part of that. Another piece is trends in public health. Google has something called flu trends based on the number of searches in their search engine, and because they know where the searches are coming from, they can track the spread of flus with an accuracy that is actually rather frightening. You look at the searches and you look at the flu, and the graphs are identical. This, however, is retrospective, looking at the world behind. There's other organizations that are looking at how do you predict, and the Center for Disease Control, for instance, has run a contest called Predict the Influenza Season Challenge to look forward, because it doesn't do them any good to know that the flu and the search engine were identical if the flu's already happened. They want to predict when it happens so it can make some interventions in the population. So that is all, again, right around crowdsourcing, whether it's picking social media, search engines, or picking the crowd for a contest. Regulatory approvals, and probably is going to be the most dramatic effect in the short term. In the old days, let's see, okay, I'll just use my finger. You would have some scientists work in the lab for a long time, give it to a few hundred people, a few thousand people to test the drug. Hundreds of millions of dollars of testing, approved, go to the crowd, boom, all of a sudden you find 6% of the population is affected by this drug, and they take it off the market. This is an example of Vioxx, which was taken off the market a short while ago for that reason. There's an approach with crowdsourcing can help this very significantly. You still have the researchers doing the research in the lab, maybe a little shorter because they may get crowdsourcing helping them. You have a much shorter safety trial with a few hundred people, a few thousand people. The FDA approves it at this point and now goes into the crowds, and as long as you're monitoring the crowd correctly, which is very easily doable with the social engagement tools, smartphone tools, the researchers can work together with the crowd to get the final approval, or not, if they determine that during that process there's a reason to kill the drug, as opposed to go through the whole approval process and then find out that there's a problem. They can do that. And I won't get into the details, but some of it has to do with predicting who should not be taking the drug, which is the problem with Vioxx, is that they should have been able to find out what was the 6% of the population that was at risk, but the company didn't want to go through that process. They just withdrew the drug. It would have been better for them to say, if you have these conditions, don't take the drug, and that way for 94% benefit for a phenomenally useful drug, and 6% don't take it because it will kill them. crowdsourcing will help that. And I'm on my last couple slides. I think I'm over time, but I apologize for that. There's crowdfunding. You're going to hear more than you ever want to know tomorrow on Friday. These are some platforms on the left that are doing the crowdfunding, meaning selling securities, selling shares to people in exchange for their money, whether they're wealthy people or public, it doesn't matter. That's different taste for different platforms. And on the right, you find the premium-based platforms. You probably recognize Kickstarter. I'm sure some of you bought some garbage on Kickstarter by sending them a few bucks in advance of you getting the phone or the watch or whatever. And it's all very good. And it's starting to move into healthcare. In fact, there's one health tech catch that is precisely for healthcare wellness type devices. And lastly, when you have all this crowdsourcing, you have a very big red flag, and there's some caution there, and that is the herd effect. There is something called confirmation bias, that you believe what you want to believe, right? Politics is full of this. In fact, everything in life, our human brains are geared for that. We can't get it out of your brain. That's how our brains are wired to work. But it does happen. You believe what you want to believe, so you go online and you see something and say, it hurts me on the right-hand side, and you think, oh, crap, I have cancer, and you will keep looking until you find something that says pain on the right side is cancer. See, I told you I had cancer, because you wanted to believe it. My mother's like that, although she doesn't use the internet, but that's it. There's also a lot of unfounded opinions. Anyone can say anything for any reason, and there's lots of unscientific evidence. So yes, it is not perfect. Crowdsourcing in many ways is imperfect. But when it's all said and done, there is no question it's already having a very significant effect in the three basic factors to improve healthcare, which are outcomes, cost, and access. And I could have spent 20 hours on this instead of 20 minutes, but thank you for your time.